Hi everyone, welcome to Sorting Myself Out. Today I have for you part 7 of the series with Dr. Roger Strachan. In this series, many of you know that he's been taking you through his development of his self-soul-spirit model of psychology, his understanding of the subpersonalities, and how to live a soul-directed life. Part 6, and now part 7, is a continuation of his experience in the wilderness. He calls it Wilderness Encounter. Wilderness Encounter is a way of mixing his model of self-soul-spirit with the deep realizations and connections that happen in the wilderness. I hope you enjoy this psychological and spiritual perspective on the Wilderness Encounter. Dr. Strachan also wanted me to tell you that in our last episode, part 6, he mentioned that he was climbing Mount McKinley when he really meant Mount Whitney. Mount McKinley is in Alaska and now has been renamed. I hope you enjoy Dr. Roger Strachan.
Having a calling. I'm there and I feel this tremendous energy, and I'm told that I should work with people. That's what I'm devoting my whole life to. That's what I should do. There is no other moment but now. And the choices you make for today. Tomorrow, you make all new choices. In 1979, I accepted a residency at Klamath Falls, Oregon, where I met Jean, my wife of 20-some years, and where I met Bill Plotkin. When I got home from climbing on the West Coast Trail and backpacking, I was met by Linda with all of my things on the front porch. We were living on the Healdsburg River in Guernsville. We'd taken some time to make our relationship stronger, and yet, as I said in the last section just before this, I was so enamored with hiking and climbing that she asked me not to make the last big trip to the West Coast Trail. But my father was opening up his last major center for alcoholism, named Ghislaine on Vancouver Island, and I was going for that event, and then afterwards go on the West Coast Trail. I told her I didn't know that I would get back to the West Coast Trail anytime soon, and I'd go ahead and make it. It was while I was gone she decided that she was going to end our relationship, though I did not learn about it till after I came off the trail. The West Coast Trail was constructed in 1906 and had been run down quite a bit and not repaired since then. The reason they constructed it because there were over 60 shipwrecks on that part of the Pacific just before the Straits of San Juan Fuca. And when these sailors came ashore, they were so glad. Then they realized they had an impenetrable rainforest and were not going to come out alive anyway. So they built this magnificent trail, rugged trail. So I wanted to do it before they came in and restored it. I'll tell you how tough it was. Sometimes it would be an hour or 2 hours just to make a couple of miles, up and over things and walking on logs over creeks. And it was an amazing, tough trail. To get there, you have to go across a little inlet, and then First Nation people have the rights to take you in a boat for which they charge you to go across the inlet. And this is out beyond Port Renfrew on the south part of the Vancouver Island. And as I came close to where I was going to meet with the First Nation person who was going to take me across, this old woman came out of her little cabin and walked up to her gate and called me over to her. And she looked at me, and then she looked right through me. And I had that feeling that I was being studied by a witch. I remembered Castaneda and Brujos, and I remember other stories, and I was in the presence of a white witch or a dark witch. Didn't know which. No pun intended. She said to me in a straightforward manner, penetrating my eyes with her eyes, "This is not your time to go in there." But all through my mandala, there is a attitudinal position which would commonly be called arrogance. The reason I never started a new school is because I'd start believing my own stuff. Much better that I'm a guru that no one knows is a guru. Here I am, 85, been very successful. And those of you watching this podcast, this is the first time I've really gone public in all these 60-some years of working with people. I have to work constantly to stay humble. This is one of the times when I should have worked harder. I knew she was right, penetrated everything that was sacred to me. But I was determined to make use of my permit, and it was October, and the season was going to end to get out there. I just had to do it anyway. And so off I went. And the second day in, I came to my campsite realizing that I had not filled up water. And I looked back along the cliff where I had just exited, above this little cliff. And there were springs right there. And I thought, oh, well, can't do any better than springs. So I gave her a couple water bottles. But I didn't put on my boots. I'm walking barefoot, and I slip on this green mossy material. And now I'm in a headlong slide down a slope greater than 30 degrees. It's probably right around 40. I'm reaching out to stop myself. I can't see the end, but I know it's not going to be pretty. And at the end, I'm going to come to a drop-off. That drop-off is going to take me right down into the ocean and to the rocks that are along the ocean floor there at the shore. Well, in the process of sliding down, I cut my right toe, the big toe, and I cut it all the way to the bone. And so now the artery is spewing out with each pump of blood, and the toe is broken, and I can see the bone barely. I know it's there. I can feel it. But I'm continuing to try to stop myself. I haven't got time to take a look at something because I'm going at a very rapid speed. I'm not able to stop myself. I come to the edge. I go over the edge, and I'm here to tell you this story, not by anything I did, miraculously, but a big wave came in just as I went over this 30-foot drop, and I landed on the wave, and I did not land on the rocks. And I was so excited to be alive. I just couldn't imagine it. But then I realized the water, I have 5 minutes in this cold water before I go into hypothermia. So I'm thrashing around and I'm trying to get up the rocks. Well, no way am I getting up these slippery rocks. And my 5 minutes is going fast. And I'm beginning to feel cold. And I see a wall crack, a chimney. And I go over, and in a corner I'm able to use hand jams and foot jams and go up this crack. And as I do so, I have to put this foot in as well with each one of the climbs, and each foot I place, and each hand I place. I can't do it with 3 points. I need the broken toe jammed into a rock. Well, between almost fainting from sheer pain and making it, I got to the top. And then I did a tourniquet, and then I dressed it out, and then I closed up the toe so it wouldn't bleed anymore. And then I decided, what am I going to do? I can't walk the rest of this trail with this toe broken. So I got to go back out. So I rested that night and went back out. That night, that native or indigenous First Nation woman came to me in a dream. And it wasn't that she said, I told you so, as much as she said, I hope from here on in you will listen to the energies of the universe. And that turned a major corner for me. From there on in, I would listen, and I would not put my client, when I took clients out, into difficult situations. I only have 2 stories of difficult situations with clients, and we survived them both. One, I acted in smart intelligence, using the knowledge of the wilderness, and one, we survived. Those stories will be told in the other stories of the wilderness. When I came out, I was heartbroken. I went to Guernsville and picked up my stuff, but I had to heal. And right there is the Armstrong National Redwood Forest. And I had to go talk to the big redwoods. And I had to scream at God. I had to scream at any part of the universe that would listen. I was so devastated to lose the woman that I loved. And I knew it was my fault. I didn't deliver to her what she needed. I was delivering to me what I needed, but I wasn't giving her the time. And by the way, I never made that mistake again. And when I tell stories about Jean, you'll understand why. And even when I tell stories about Mado, my other partner the last 40 years. I'm in these redwoods and I'm just by this wonderful creek, and I'm hugging redwoods, and I'm crying, and I'm screaming. And I sit down just screaming my head off. I'm yelling at God so loud that all the universe could hear me. And sure enough, an 8-point buck, well over 250 pounds, comes out of the woods across the creek, and he cocks his head and he looks at me and he says, "Give it a rest. What's your problem? Everybody loses in love once in a while. How about being grateful for the time you had?" And he's cocking his head back and forth. And all of a sudden, I realized what an ass I'm being. And I looked up at God and I said, "Thank you for the gift of the buck to straighten my little white ass out. I'm just going to turn these tears into gratitude." And that's what I did, and began the let-going process. For the rest of that year, I backpacked all around the Northwest, saying goodbye to Linda, saying goodbye to a great love. We never knew anything but play. We were off 5 years together, and we just played. She was part of that trip to Mexico. But I vowed I would never do that again. I would vow that whatever kind of addictive process I have to the wilderness, it will be monitored in having a relationship. So the wilderness does have an impact. What the story is telling you is that if you're open and you have a wild genetic part, you will be impacted by the wilderness. You will be impacted if you have a hermit like I do and never want to come out. I've been into the bottom of the Grand Canyon 55 times, mostly off the North Rim. All my colleagues laugh at me because I never want to come out. And they're always saying, "Roger, You're dragging your feet. We got to get to the car sometime today. You're lollygagging. And I saying, why don't you guys just arrange with all the boat runners to send me down supplies? I'm never coming out. And we laugh and they'd laugh. And yet there was a major truth in that. I swear to God, if I didn't have other things going on in my life and a family, I would have stayed down there and took all the offerings from the boat runners, the river runners. The Grand Canyon is one of the most magnificent places in the world. And to get yourself in there, and to be in there, and to be in an environment that creates its own atmosphere and weather, and literally shows you the center rocks right out of the great upheaval, right out of the center of the earth. You have to be so closed off and miss everything, because if you're open, you will be affected. You will be changed. I had a great time in 1978 going around and staying with friends. And I did trades with them. And I was taking all of 78 to prepare for when I was going to do wilderness. But I had accepted this position in Klamath Falls, ostensibly to a residency, but truthfully, I just wanted to climb all the Cascades. And Bill Plotkin and I met, and we went there for a week, and we climbed Mount Shasta with my son the first week. And now this is what leads to Gene. I opened the residency up, and it starts in September. And on the 1st of October, Gene has been to a Kubler-Ross workshop in Southern California. And there's not that many health providers in Klamath Falls, Oregon, and she invited all of us to her home to do a presentation of Kubler-Ross. And as I got to her house, I didn't know who she was, but I was roaming around the den, and there she was, a picture, standing on the top of Mount Shasta with her ice axe over her head. And I said, that's it. The next woman has to be someone with an ice axe over their head. And so I met her, but she was married and I simply forgot about it. I didn't know she was in the process of getting a divorce. And she came to see me, and we began a relationship. Now, to show you how this works, it was time for Gene and I to get married. That's 1979, and now it's 1981, and we're at the Chericaba Mountains doing what I told you I was being the chef for the summer. And we're setting up the wedding, and my mother, who Gene and my mother just fell in love with each other from the moment they met, said to Gene, don't marry this man. He's always out in the wilderness. You can never get a hold of him. If anything went wrong, I wouldn't know how to connect him. And you know what he says to me? If something goes wrong, then I'll take care of it, because I trust you, Mom. Well, I did. What can I do? I'm out in the wilderness. I can't do anything. And Gene looked at my mother and said, Tot, which is my mother's nickname, Tot, I like to do the same things he does. And my mother got this sour, funny look on her face, and she said, well, then you deserved each other. And yes, we did. And we started this podcast looking at Democrat Lincoln and Bross. And Gene and I climbed together. We climbed many things together. Sometimes she was smart enough not to follow me. Sometimes it was treacherous, and she knew better. We got into the Wilson group outside of Telluride, and I plodded away to get up Mount Wilson, but the snow was too deep going up the Standard Way, and we were just making post holes that are just wearing us out. So I went back to the maps, and I found another way that we could get on a ridge, from a small ridge that went up to the upper ridge. Then you had to walk that ridge all along going north back to Wilson Peak. Mount Wilson was to our right. It was a knife edge ridge, and rocks were being disturbed and falling off under our feet. And Jean is just feeling abused. And we get to the last little pitch that takes you up to Wilson Peak. And she said, "I've had it. This mountain has abused me all day long. I had no idea any time whether I was going to go off and the first bounce was going to be 1,000 feet down. I'm just stressed." And I said, "Well, yeah, but there's just this last pitch." And she said, "I'm not going." I said, in my arrogant way, "Well, you won't get a 360 view." And she said to me, "220's fine, you asshole." And that capped it off, and she sat down. Now I'm searching around because it's too soon to be in there, and I find a little tiny couloir, and I see handholds, and up I scamper. But I forget to put a little cairn where I came up. And after enjoying the view of this 14,000 footer, I'm walking around saying, "How did I get up here?" I didn't come up there. I'm looking down and said, "Oh no, I didn't come up there." And finally I said, "Jean, how did I get up here?" And she said, "I don't know, you jerk. You find it. You got yourself up there. Find the way down. I'm enjoying myself." Finally, I see the little spot that I came up on. I scampered down. And that was the way it was for many, many mountains. Many we climbed together and had such fun. And sometimes it was treacherous, like the Wilson Peak. And sometimes it was an easy walk up. Always it was glorious. And so when it came time for me to switch from just men going into the wilderness and taking out couples, Jean joined me. And also, I would not take out a woman by herself. The wilderness and the two genders, it's just too treacherous in terms of relationship. And it's too easy to have feelings get all mixed up. And so Jean always went with me when I took out a woman. And I'll be telling wonderful stories. So from 73 to 79 at the residency, I practiced on what I would do in the wilderness. I did a few freebies, took some people out, tried short-term trips and did exercise with those. They were all practice runs. When I got back to Bisbee in 1981, because I spent a year in Durango, where Bill Plotkin put together the Animas Valley Institute. Jean and I like to say we were his midwives, and he's done so beautifully creating a system and a theoretical position of sustainable living and of soul-directed living. I went back to Bisbee and I began to do a small practice that would lead into wilderness. And here I'm going to read to you the first wilderness trip and how it went. I must say, on this first trip, that I planned some of it. This is the only trip I ever planned anything. From there on in, we had a theme, we had a place to go. It was all based on what the person was working on, but we did everything from there on in spontaneously. And I'll tell you a couple stories where we literally packed up and went to another location because it was more appropriate. David would work with me, and he and his wife had worked with Jean and I, and they had struggled. And David was an intellectual, and everything had to be analyzed and overanalyzed. And I said, the wilderness would would be a good thing for you. I would like you to be my first. I'm going to read what David wrote to me just recently in his memory of the first experience. I will interrupt every now and then to make a point. Here's David's words. Best I can remember, it was 1981 in Bisbee, Arizona. I'd continued counseling with Roger as he had helped me through the separation and eventual divorce from my wife that December. I decided to address all the issues I thought I might have had so I could move on cleanly into the next chapter of my life. I had very good insurance coverage, and Roger knew the ropes to make it happen. Can you believe it? Insurance companies paid for wilderness. He asked me if I might be interested in a new approach he was considering developing, combining his love of the outdoors with counseling, something he called wilderness therapy. He and his then wife Jean would act as a team and would go camping for a night in the wilderness. We actually went more than a night. We went a couple of nights. I loved being outdoors hiking, and so I was more than willing. We drove up to the end of the road in Rucker Canyon. Rucker Canyon, these are my words now, in the Chiricahua Mountains is one of the most gorgeous canyons. I've gone way up into there, where the only way to get into it is either come up the way I came or down a very steep canyon wall. I was up so far right at the headwaters that I never saw anyone. No one would work that hard except a few crazy people like me to get there. Spend a week or 2 weeks in Rucker. So he was set. Rucker Canyon is just north of Douglas, Arizona. We parked there and hiked north into the canyon toward the Chiricahua Mountains. With our gear, Roger and Jean carrying the bulk of it, I believe Roger had made a rule we hike in silence for a while. Well, it wasn't a rule, it was an intentional thing. I don't necessarily do that when I take people out. But David is in his head so much, I thought the only way to get him into the wilderness and get anything out of it right away was to get him to pay attention to his footfall and the trees around him. And since I knew he loved the wilderness, that would be easier than trying to do counseling while we're walking. I believe Roger had asked me to hike in silence for a while, and it turned out to be a long while. And when we stopped finally to rest, I expressed some concern about when we would actually start the counseling. I like to talk, and this was difficult going for me, not doing so. Roger said he was observing me and expressed mild surprise I was in good a shape hiking as I was. Jean interfered then. This is not in his writing. Jean said, "Your client is tired. Stop." And I said, "Oh, but there's a great camp up." This is the only time I ever did this. From there on in, I listened not only to my wife, Jean, but to the client. And so we went just a small distance further and we stopped. He gave me an assignment to keep my mind busy. I guess looking back on it, as we hiked along further, I was to think of my animal talisman. The word that I most closely associated with he shared with me was his, the eagle. I had read Carlos Castaneda, A Separate Reality, and one or two more of his books, so the idea wasn't foreign to me, except applying that to myself. It was a difficult task. I have kept my mind busy all right. I don't remember Jean saying much during the 2 days. She and Roger would talk aside, it seemed, and then Roger would report to me. I also didn't do that anymore. From there on in, I talked right in front of our clients, which was another major breakthrough. I don't remember helping with the meal prep, setting up, or breaking down camp. I might have, but they had brought everything. I had just my belongings, my tent, and my sleeping bag. It was that night, or the second night, I suppose, Maybe the next morning we had constructed a sweat lodge. I remember hunting for rocks and Roger explaining the kinds to get and the kinds not to get and why. I was intrigued but nervous. For some reason I didn't know what to expect. We'd strip down to our underwear for the heat to do this thing. I do remember being somewhat embarrassed when Roger finally asked me what animal I had chosen. I told him the fox. Why? Because it was wily, slight, agile, and clever, and I consider myself all those. He declared I was like the little fox. I was somewhat disappointed, and Roger told me I would grow into being just a fox with life experiences. I do consider myself fox now, having survived a share of life's challenges, meeting them head on and still here, hoping for more. I remember I was given an opportunity to ask whatever I wanted. I was still curious about something Roger had told me earlier in our regular counseling. It was that I saw the world black and white and never right and wrong, that I had no room for the in-between. I had argued, discussed, that was correct, and failed to see what life was seldom black or white, mostly gray. It was partly through further conversation the world opened to me more, and I allowed myself to consider the possibilities. Today, that is a natural. I don't remember what else we talked about, if anything. I just remember it being more of a cleansing process. I was feeling awkward, and a good deal of the time like I was not doing well with the process. Roger assured me things would fall into place afterwards more and more on their own. I did realize I had carried a lot of preconceived notions. I also realized that it may be a good idea to let some of those go. For instance, I was fearful that, though the divorce my two young children would suffer, much less have of a life without a nuclear family, Roger set me straight, and that their lives would be neither better or worse, just different. It depended on how their mother and I handled the situations and worked together, even though we would be physically apart, to meet their challenges. He pointed out that I had trust. We had the same value base, which is what brought us together initially. It proved more than true, and I was very fortunate, blessed to have a chosen woman to marry that I would keep the interests of our children ahead of our own. I look back on the experience as one of the most fully bonding, more of an affirmation of myself as an individual able to do that. Roger and I have remained friends over the years. I should maybe explain I came to him by way of his daughter, who was family friend as well. Roger calls me his hero. I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe he calls everyone his hero. Maybe because I have made it through some adversities in life, grown through them. He's actually my hero. He salvaged me through a very difficult time in my life and prepared me to face the rest. I don't know what else to add. I'm a bit overwhelmed remembering any of this. It was a very unique, valuable experience and a valuable exercise, again, recounting it. I cannot fully thank you, Roger, enough. I have often said that the universe placed the perfect person with the perfect skills for me there in my time of most need. I'm honored that I was somehow chosen as the first to experience your wilderness therapy. I'm also honored that we have remained friend, eagle and fox, hunting out our existence. This began many, many stories. The stories are their stories, not my stories. What they don't realize is that they do all the work, and it's my job to facilitate their parts and their genetic inheritance and what they've learned and how those learned parts have developed different kinds of ways of being in the world, attitudes, characteristics. My job is to keep them moving through those parts. David did that, and David moved from an intellectual, analytical person based on rights and wrongs to a very loving, kind, and to this day now, he is a father and a grandfather and loves his grandchildren in the same way he loved his children. And yes, he and his former wife have maintained a way of behavior and dignity and respect with each other that their children feel very comfortable and not are caught between them at all. To the contrary, any big event, both parents are there present. Thank you for this great story, David, and I'm glad we still know each other. And we met actually in 1976, 77. It's a long time. And it was beautiful that I put it together, and other people were guinea pigs, but you were the first bona fide client. I have stories now for over 50 years. If you like these stories, respond. You tell Ryan that bring them on. Thank you very much.